Today, we're going to have a special morning where we're going to talk about missions. I'm going to speak, David will speak, and then Cheney will speak. We're going to cover the missions that we're involved with as a church and personally in India, in Laramie, and in Kenya. And we just ask for you to carefully consider, where will God have you to be involved in missions? Part of the Great Commission is go ye therefore. Many people here in Life Fellowship have been around a while or mature or very supportive of missions, but we also have some brand new people, and we have some people that have kind of transferred in and joined us. We'd like to let you understand where Life Fellowship people in particular have been involved in missions, and for you to consider who would you be personally involved with to prayer, to support, and to go on missions trips to these places. So let's get started. The Bible says, go ye therefore. The first place we're going to talk about is our trip to India. Go ahead to the next slide. We flew from Kansas City to Chicago to Delhi to Vishakhapatnam, which is just south of Rayagada a little bit there, and then drove 5 hours on a very bumpy Karsiki ride all the way to Rayagada. That's where Pastor Pradeep's ministry is. If you look at it, it's in a beautiful area. India is a gorgeous country, lots of mountains, lots of green, lots of streams, rivers, things like that. But there's 1.1 billion people there. And about 1 billion of those do not know Jesus and have never really even heard of him. They're Hindus. Another section of that 100 million or so that aren't Hindus are Muslims up in the northern part of India near Pakistan and that border region. So the three primary religions there are Hindu at some huge percentage, 95%, 3% Muslim, and then the rest are Christian or Buddhist or other different things. The Christians that are there are all the quote-unquote Christians of any kind of missionary that's ever been there. So there just aren't very many gospel preaching ministries there. So go to the next slide. This is the group that went, motley crew. It's a hard trip. It's a long trip. It's a very, very exhausting trip in that we were busy all day, every day, morning to night, practically. But it was probably the most fruitful trip Anita and I have ever been on, probably by far even. And we've been on some good ones. Go to the next slide. Pastor Pradeep, the gentleman on to the left of Chris there, was a disciple of Doug Pearson in Mumbai, and he asked Pradeep to go out and start a church in Rayagada about 20 years ago. Time-wise, think about that. That's about the same time that Midtown was started. Originally, they planted a main church and a pastor's training school, and Nita and I were there many, many, many years ago when it was just a little tiny startup church. The church probably had, 30, 40 people in it. The pastor's school had 6, 8, 10, about 6 or 8 guys that were actually actively involved. He later started an orphanage. They were trained out of the Greater Grace churches, which are based in Baltimore. Similar-minded to us, not exactly the same, but similar-minded, and Doug got hooked up with them because they had a base in India. They were focusing on planting churches around India. So he graduated from Shepherd School with me at Kansas City Baptist Temple, but then went and plugged into Greater Grace because KCBT didn't have any connections or anything going on in India. They have now, from Pastor Pradeep's church, have started 25 other churches. They have 39 Bible studies going on, and they now have 12 full-time students in the pastor's schools. And what they do with their pastors is unlike LFBI, that's more like a college, take what you want, when you want, get through it at whatever pace. If you become one of these people, it's dedicated classroom. They help support them with primarily missions giving from all over the world. They train them up, and then they're expected to go out and start Bible studies in churches. Even some of the guys they go to school like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Friday, they motorbike or get a ride back to their little villages. They hold church on the weekends and then come back the next week. And that's just kind of the model. So it's just kind of a different model, but some of these churches that they've planted now have over 100 people in them. So they've just got a much more pastor-focused view, but they are really impacting the world. Some of those churches, I mean, we visited some, Anita and I visited churches 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, and the people that we saw saved then were baptized and are now in those churches, and they've grown enormously from the time that we were there. And it's a great, great thing to see. Next slide, please. We initially went, and one of the first things we did is we went out into this mountain area on the outskirts of town. There was rice paddies, mountains, and Pastor Pradeep is praying about an area of ground out there that he can buy to put up a church and training compound. Where they are, they're in the city. The Hindus give them all kinds of trouble when they hear Christian praise music. There's not terrible persecution in the city, but there's always tension. So he'd like to move the school out in the country where it's less people to bother, less radicals. So the area where you see there on the left is kind of an area where he would like to do that. Next slide. The first job that we had as we went there is we taught a pastor's summit. Pastors from all over India, the central part of India, came to this. We had, 120 guys roughly show up. And we taught through the first 3 chapters of Revelation a little bit in chapter 1, and then the church ages specifically in chapters 2 and chapter 3. And that's a dispensational truth that many of them had not really understood before. They didn't understand, they don't understand the dispensation so much. And so this was eye-opening to them to see exactly what the church ages were and where we are in that church age sequence. Okay, you can see the church on the left there. That is Pastor Pradeep's main church. They will cram 150, 200 people in there. It's a room not as big as this one. No air conditioning, 85 to 90 degrees, 90% humidity, and they will sit there and listen all day long to get God's word. How many of us would do that here? Think about that. How big would Midtown be if we were meeting all summer long, no air conditioning? They will travel in primitive ways, motor scooters, whatever, and they will sit there in the heat all day, every day to get God's word. It's amazing. Next slide, please. The next thing we got to do was a vacation Bible school. We broke up into groups and took age groups. Anita and I got the older kids, the Beths took the younger kids. It was amazing what to see those kids. This orphanage is way nicer than any college dorm you've ever seen. The kids are beautiful. They are clean. They are very well fed. He's taking orphans. What happens there is if a mother loses her husband through divorce, illness, whatever, the new husbands may want to marry her, but they won't accept the kids that she already has. So they abandon them. And a lot of these kids, and the same thing's true of Nepal, the kids are just abandoned. We had a mother that was just so poor while we were there, she just turned in her youngest son because she said, I just can't feed him. What can we do? And this is a Christian lady. It's just so sad. And the Vacation Bible School was awesome. They absolutely just stormed Lindsay. They thought she was a movie star with the long blonde hair, and they absolutely just fell in love with her. And in fact, everywhere Lindsay and Anita and some of the other ladies went, this is a town that is not a tourist town, so they don't see very many Americans, but they were just like, oh, can we have your picture? Can we have a picture? Can we have a picture? They were one of, Anita and Lindsay were one of, 20 blondes in the whole state. Okay, next slide. And here VBS, David, Lindsay took a group, Chris and I took a group, Chris and Christine took a group, Anita and I took a group. Here's some pictures of the kids that we saw. Notice the marble floors. Beautiful, beautiful area. Pastor Pradeep actually has a sister that's fairly wealthy that bought the building or built the building and is renting it to him at a very reasonable price. But it's just absolutely gorgeous facility. Okay, next, please. The next thing we did is all of our ladies taught a women's conference. And what they did is they covered primarily the blueprint. They did a summary, kind of high overview of blueprint. And that's something really important in India. In India, the ladies do not participate in church like the men do. It's not like here where everybody's a servant, everybody's a minister, everybody's equal. So it's hard to encourage them, now that they're Christians, to take on the Christian culture instead of the Hindu, subservient, stay in the back, do nothing culture. And so that was very important. And also just all the teaching of how to be good mothers, how to be good wives to their husbands, how to be good ministers. Okay, next please. In the evenings, we went out and did village evangelism. And what that meant is we'd drive anywhere from half an hour to more out into the villages surrounding Rayagada. This one was a mountaintop village. It was on top of a medium-sized mountain. These aren't rocky mountains, but they're pretty good-sized mountains. And there was a village there of about 200 people. And Pastor Pradeep and his guys have a Bible study there, existing Bible study. Go to the next slide. And we had a large number of people turn up. They just went out and told everybody they knew, Americans are coming, Americans are coming, Americans are coming. So people literally that were living in their huts in the forests came, people from other villages came, people from all around came, just mostly because the Americans were there. So Anita and I were joking, we finally found our calling in life. We're really good bait. Because they came. On the left, you can see Pastor Pradeep and David and some other people up front, all the people sitting in the street, hot as can be, sitting there just listening to the messages. And the slide on the right is astounding. Most of the men there in the front are part of that Bible study or church and are sitting there. Those that you see standing in the back are standing to pray and accept Christ. This is on a mountain with 200 people, and there's probably 30 people standing up there. That's going to change that entire area forever. And if they get plugged in and start evangelizing, that can be unbelievable what can happen from that. This town is suddenly a quarter Christian, true Christian. And that's just amazing that God would do that and use all of us that way. This is what missions is all about. If you pray, if you invest some time, if you go, God will save the world. But this was absolutely amazing. And their cost of discipleship isn't like our class where we beg people to come and accept Christ's lordship and actually show up and plug in. When they accept Christ, they are often kicked out of their job, out of their family, sometimes out of the village they live in, just for professing Christ as their Savior. They could teach us about cost of discipleship. Okay, next slide. They fed us. This is hand-grown rice and dal and range chicken that they served to us on great big forest leaves. This is stuff, they have no tractors. They didn't even have oxen or cattle. They hand farm all of this. And this whole area is that way. You saw the ladies in the first picture coming out of the rice paddy. That's how it is there. This is a third world country. These people, the people that have jobs in these little villages, we were told make $100 to $200 a month and live on it. And yet what's surprising, they're some of the happiest people on earth. Happy, kind, friendly. Even though they're living in these little tiny huts or worse. Next slide, please. This is another village that we went to. They told us when we went there, they said, we've come here for 8 years. We've had almost no luck at all. This is a very, very dark, dark village. It's radical Hindus run it. Beautiful setting, but just kind of a little scummy town, not even all that well picked up or clean or anything. Go to the next slide. People sat back in their little huts there and just kind of glared at us. But we did have a group that came, and we had some people that made professions of faith. One of Pastor Pradeep's, one of the girls that attends his church is from this village. But like I said, they've been going there for 7 years and have almost no fruit at all. But we had, I think, they wouldn't stand up in that village. It might cost them their life. But we had several people that were praying when Pastor Pradeep was doing the prayer of salvation, and we think probably accepted Christ. As we were leaving, we were told, this is a really, really dark place. It's one of the few places on earth in this village they still do human sacrifices. That's what happens when Satan gets hold of an area or a town. Next slide, please. The last Sunday we were there, we went to the Mountaintop Village, and there's this beautiful little church, another little town. You can kind of see the theme. These towns are just stacked block buildings with some stucco on them if you're lucky. And a lot of times the government will do, if you look at these on the left, they're not finished yet, the government will rough them in. And then if you want to buy it, they will actually give you money to finish it and build it up, because they're trying to get people out of the thatch huts and things like that and into real dwellings. They don't have running water. They don't have toilets. They don't have much in the way of electricity. There's a little bit of electricity, but you go in there, they'll have one light bulb. They'll have maybe a hot plate of some kind, but it's not anything like what we're used to here, or even in the city. Rayagada is a fairly modern city where it's got most of the modern creature comforts. I got to hold a newborn goat. They thought that was a big deal. I named him Patrick Mahomes. Next slide. Here's how they got to church. We were amazed. These little tut-tuts, little 2-cylinder, I think, climbed this big mountain. We passed them coming up. It took them like half an hour to get up the mountain to the top of this. There's like 12 or 13 people in that thing. Count them. There were so many, and they were all like, ah. But here's the church. The middle slide, that's their tithes and offerings. There's like 15 bowls of rice. That's 1/10 of what they harvested that week. That's their offering to the church. And the church puts it into a common ground, and then they actually did a pretty good, right here, they're doing a pretty good meal for everybody after the event. But they'll do that, or they'll sell it and use it to buy stuff for the church. But that's how the tithes and offerings come. You can see the ladies going into the house. We went into a little house there that they served us lunch. The food, water, everything there is very hazardous to people who aren't used to the bacteria and other organisms in it, so we had to be very, very, very careful. You don't even drink the water when you're taking a shower. You don't let it in your mouth or your eyes. It's just, it can cause big problems. The first trip we went on, we had one of our team members ate a salad at a Marriott hotel. But the salad was wet with the water they'd washed it from, and he was miserable for 24 hours. Miserable, just from that. So we've learned to be very careful, and they took really, really good care of us. Okay, next slide. Okay, actually I put that slide, go to the next slide, and we'll come back to that. Okay, David, you want to come up? David's going to talk about some of the relationships we built, some of the things we saw, all of that, and then we'll go back to the prayer points. So go ahead.
think I'm pressing a button there. Hold. There we go. Okay. So, true little story. So every night we're going to a different Bible study, and like Larry said, it could be 20 minutes, it could be an hour and a half. And after a while, I'm the kind of guy that I get a little bored, and, I have to burn off some energy. So one of the things that I did was Lindsay kind of went everywhere that I went, and I said, nobody waves here. Where I come from, everybody waves. So I said, I'm going to try and get somebody to wave to me. So we're going through the city, and there's like zillions of people. And so hey, bro. And they just look at you like, what? I couldn't get anybody to wave at me. And Lindsay said, let me try. And she said, hey, and hey. Everybody waved at Lindsay. And there was one guy, we drove by, and he said, whoa. I'm like, there's something wrong with this. But so my story is a little bit different. So I told Chris before we left, I went last year, and I said, Chris, I'm not a teacher. That's not my gift, and I know that. And so I'm kind of evaluating what my contribution to this trip is. And so we discussed it. I had something in the back of my mind. I'm a relational person. I do really well one-to-one, but I know my gift isn't teaching. So I said, I don't think that's where I belong in this trip. So I'm more of a one-on-one relational trip, relational in the trip. So I just want to show you a few of the faces of the people and then kind of tell you what I was doing. So this is Masidas. Masidas is blind, and Pastor Pradeep found him in the train station playing the tambourine and begging. And he's just a super sweet guy. He plays Amin Dolak. You'll have to go look that up. But he's incredibly talented, incredibly sweet spirit. And now he goes to the train station and he preaches. And Pastor Pradeep said they leave him alone. He doesn't get persecuted a lot because he's blind, and people kind of just leave him alone and they let him preach. So he's just a really cool guy. Go to the next one. This is just a random, there's a girl in Kaya that she reminds me exactly of. That's like her little sister. So, but the smile, I mean, they're the beautiful faces. As Larry said, these people are just the happiest people you've ever met. Just beaming, beautiful people. Next. This is the kid that I would wrap up and take home in a heartbeat. This is Aditya. He is who I call my son of thunder because he plays many different kind of drums at church. I have a video of a song. It takes too long. I'd love to play it for you. But he's just a super sweet kid, and I would adopt him in a heartbeat if I could. But one of the problems that they have there, because they still have the caste system. They say they don't, but they do. And somebody like Aditya could never come to the States because he doesn't have the documentation that would allow him to come. So he's in limbo, no man's land in India. He could never do anything. So, and then the next slide, he's getting baptized that day. So I said, before, I think I put it on Live Fellowship chat, we did all aspects of the Great Commission here. We preached, we taught, and we baptized. And so it was the full Monty there. Okay, next. This is Kailash Pani. He's one of Pastor Pradeep's associate pastors. We've kind of developed a relationship over the last couple of years. Just a super sweet guy, super hungry for the things of the Lord. He wants anything that you can give him, and he's one of the right-hand men for Pastor Pradeep. Next. This, we were in the little village that we went to, and Larry showed you a picture of it a minute ago. This girl, she was just so captivating to me. She would not smile at me at all, and I tried for 10 minutes to get her to smile, and she would not. So finally, I just had to snap this picture of her, and she's just a super sweet little girl. Next. This is not happy, sweet faces. This is what happens when you've been on a plane for 30 hours It just kind of, I don't know how I got that, but Chris's face was so, I thought that was such a cool picture. I thought I have to put that up there. All right, next. This is one of the examples of the Bible studies that we went to. You'd go into this little room, this might be 12 by 12 room, and they would just pack it out, and people would still be coming in. You think, okay, where are they going to sit? They keep packing them in. They just come in like sardines, and they will just keep scooting and keep scooting and keep scooting, and everybody gets in. And so after a while, everybody's just sitting there elbow to elbow, but they're hungry. They want to hear. And so it was really amazing to see how those people responded to us. Next. So this is one of the things that one of our main reasons that we came was to help with the graduation. And these are the 4 young men that graduated this time. Andrew's on the left. Enosh is to the right of him. I can't remember that guy's name. And then in the back, my mind just went blank. I'll think about it in a minute because he's actually someone that Noah Corrado. I'm sorry? Noah. Yeah. And so, and if you look at me, that's what happens when you have 7 days of jet lag and it's hot and it's humid and you forget to untuck your shirt and it's like, man, that is a horrible picture, but man, that's kind of how we felt the whole time. At some point, on the trip, everybody at some point's nodding off. It could be morning, it could be evening. It's like, I don't know what time it is, but I can't stay awake. So, all right, next slide. So this is Noah. And so one of the reasons that I went there was, again, getting back to knowing your gifts. I'm not a teacher. I'm not a preacher. God hasn't gifted me that way. But God has given me some gifts, and my objective was to begin to utilize those. So Noah studied as a Jesuit priest for 4 years. He heard the gospel, and Pastor Pradeep got a hold of him, and he has now graduated from the pastor school. As Larry was saying, they're living off of $100 to $200 a month. Pastor Pradeep can take these men into his school that's on one of the levels of the orphanage, and these guys come in, they live there, he sends them out to minister. Daytime they're preaching, but these guys are functioning off of $150 a month. So one of my goals was I wanted to go to find someone that I could get behind and say, look, you're my missionary. When we send someone out as a missionary in this church, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, I don't know what it costs, but it costs a chunk of money to send someone out. But for $150, I can support this guy. I chatted with him last night. And I said, hey, what's going on? Tell me what's going on in the ministry. Who are you praying for? Who are you witnessing to? What are the Bible studies that you're interested in? What can I do to pray for you? I don't want to just support, like send $20 a month to someone. I want to be a part of your ministry. I want to be your partner. When you have a need, I want to know that need. When you have a praise, I want to know that praise. I want to be part of this ministry. So I'm partnering with Pastor Pradeep. I'm going through him, but Noah's my guy, and I'm working with him. It's one thing to, he's going to need a motorcycle. It's one thing for just say, hey, let me just throw some money at you and do whatever. But this is, for me, it's a whole different level. I want to be a part of this ministry in India. So I'm getting behind Noah. And the next slide, go ahead and pop to that. This is Monica, his fiance. They're getting married next year. She graduated from the school last year. And she wants to get into some type of Christian education. She was in Kandhamal, but the persecution, India, depending on what website you look at, is somewhere between the 11th and 3rd most persecuted countries in the world, which means, as Larry was saying, cost of discipleship. There was a lady that lives with Pastor Pradeep. Her husband was burned to death because he's a Christian. In the door of his church. And that's not like an uncommon story. That's common. Everybody knows somebody that's suffered some form of persecution up to and including death. So Monica was up in Camden Mall in the area where there's a lot of persecution, but she had to come back because the persecution got too severe. And so she's staying there right now until she comes to the next part of her life. But so what I just wanted to communicate to you, and this is what I would challenge. This isn't for everyone, but it is for some. For $150 a month, I can support this couple. And they can go out, and not only am I supporting them, and not only are they, which they're eager to do, they are giving themselves to ministry. But I can be a partner with them, and I can be one-on-one involved directly with the mission in India through them. And so maybe you're in a situation where you say, hey, I could be in that, I could be in that place. Not just because you're supporting the mission and supporting the missionary, but I texted her this morning. I couldn't remember Moshe's last name, and she texted me back. But we're constantly texting each other now. Hey, what's going on? Well, how can I pray for you? There's a direct relationship that I have with them to that ministry. So if that's something that you're interested in, talk to me, because I think that this little model is reproducible, and others could be involved in that too. And then, by the way, once they get out, Pastor Pradeep has new men and women needing to be in the school, but there are financial restrictions that he has. So, he's only limited right now by, the monetary side of it. So if that's something that you're interested in, let me know. But anyway, incredible blessing, and pray about that.
Yep. Okay, please go back to the India prayer slide. And we're going to spend about 3 minutes and pray for missions in India. And what David was saying about support, Anita and I have supported Pastor Pradeep since he went out, almost since the very beginning of when he went out, because we knew Doug Pearson so well. Realize when they send a missionary out to a village, that village may never give them a job. So they need support until they get established in that new place. So that's part of why we help them, get established out there. Okay, if you would, break up into groups of 2 or 3 or however many is convenient. Pray through these prayer points. Pray for Pastor Pradeep. He works himself absolutely to death. He does have good men now. Some of the people like Kalish was in pastor school. I got to help teach in their pastor school 10 years ago when Anita and I went there. And he is now Pastor Pradeep's right-hand man. So that's cool to see. Pray for the men that are in school. Pray for the women to grow in ministry. Pray for the village church growth, those 25 church plants. Pray for support for the new campus and help support for the orphanage. There are way more orphans than they can afford to take in. And realize those kids are growing up to be die-hard Christians and the boys pastors. Also, protection from the evil Hindus. They're always under attack. There was a big uprising about a month ago where they wanted to go in and kill all the Christian pastors, and thank goodness the federal government stopped them because they saw that as going to be too big of a problem. But the federal government looks the other way a lot of the time when Christians are being persecuted. So spend about 3 minutes, and then we're going to spend a few minutes talking about Laramie, and then we'll have Cheney talk about Kenya. Okay, if you would, please take a photo of this slide and pray for the India missions. Something I do every week is I alternate what I pray for each day. On Monday, I pray for salvations of families and friends and things like that. On Tuesdays, I pray for pastors. On Wednesdays, I pray for missionaries. And that's where I specifically have things like this. And if you have a prayer schedule like that and have different days, you won't just be repeating the same things. So add this to your missionary prayer time. The next trip we'd like to talk about, and this will be rather brief so Cheney gets plenty of time. We went to Laramie 10 days after we got back from India. We were barely over the jet lag, but that's just how it worked. But we went to the Laramie Fusion Feast. Many of you know George and Jamie. They come to our conferences. Incredible people. Laramie's a beautiful, beautiful place. God has called them to plant a church there, and they're doing amazing work. Go to the next slide. We drive there and then prepare food. This is just like our FOI welcome party. Prepare food. Now we have so many people. Originally, we had to do all the food prep 5 years ago when this started. Now, we pretty well help a little bit, but it's actually the more mature people in that FOI that come and cook the food from their countries to welcome the other international students that are coming onto campus. They have a huge, the only 4-year big university in Wyoming is there, University of Wyoming, and so there's lots of internationals. Next slide. We had 275 guests, probably 70% of them international students, and we fed them, we built the relationships with them. George and Jamie got connected with them. George and Jamie's church is about 20 people. They do FOI events where they often get 100 or more kids. And they hear the gospel. The hard part that they have is connecting them to the church because they don't have any Kaya-age people or hadn't up until now. George led a gentleman to the Lord that works with him that's 22 years old. They have another international student from Iran that's a doctoral student that has gotten saved. They're starting to get that momentum. And if any of you that are on the chat saw this last week, they're now getting the international students to their Bible studies. So go to the next slide. We also got to go out and hike in the mountains, see the beautiful area. It's an incredible place. Anybody who wants to go out and visit them is welcome anytime. And they're just incredibly hospitable. The next slide. Okay, downtown is kind of a college town. It's half cowboy and half college town. So and I mean cowboy. It is not southwestern like Albuquerque or Denver. It is cowboy boots and true ranchers with the big hats. Next slide. Okay, we'll do this at the end. I'm going to let Cheney come up, but we want to pray for Laramie and the people in all of these churches for the spiritual growth, for salvations. You can take a photo of this. We'll bring it back up at the end. But also, pray about where will God have you involved in missions. Will you pick some of these ministries that God lays on your heart and pray for them every week? Will you consider giving to help support these ministries, especially the foreign ministries that are so, so poor? Kenya's just like India in that regard. The people there we know a family that's living on $90 a month. Or maybe double that. Their rent is $90 a month, and they get about double that. So where will you be involved? And then, very importantly, we are so rich and so blessed and so well taught here. Who will you take that knowledge out and connect? And like David said, you don't have to be the guy standing in front of the church. David had a huge impact. All the members did. Where will you go this next year and support missions? Cheney, come on up. Ministry on Anita's in my heart. Incredible what God's doing there.
Thank you guys so much for having me today. Okay. So, good morning. As you guys know, my name is Cheney Perkins. And if the Lord will, then in January of this coming year, I'll be moving to Nairobi, Kenya with Miles Cheadle and his family. And so I just wanted to share a little bit with you guys today about who I am, my personal testimony, and how we got to this point where I'm going to be going to Kenya now for a year. And then I also want to share a little bit about the work in Nairobi right now and how you guys can be praying and supporting the work. And so with that, I'll just start with my testimony. I grew up going to church my entire life. My grandpa was a pastor at KCBT and later became the pastor of another church. And I ended up going to that church until I was in about the 3rd grade. And then at that point, my parents felt that God was leading our family to another church in Blue Springs called First Bible Baptist Church. And we went there until I graduated from high school. And if I'm being honest, I did not want to be there pretty much at all. Like, I knew I was supposed to be there. I was even planning on bringing my family, my kids, whenever I got older, and bringing them to church, but I didn't really fully understand why. And that was when COVID hit. And so my parents started watching Midtown sermons online. They would watch our church, and then they would watch Midtown, and they just noticed that something was different about this church. And so when Midtown opened back up after COVID, we started coming here, and I hated it. It was terrible. I thought it was awful because at our church, I could just sit in the back row, I could listen to the sermon, and then as soon as the service was over, I could slip right out and go back to living my life however I wanted. But not at Midtown. It was impossible at Midtown to leave after the service was over without meeting somebody new. They would pull me in, and the real problem at Midtown was even the people in the back rows, they knew their Bible. And so not only was I having conversations with these people, but now they're asking about my salvation. They're asking about my relationship with Christ. And so eventually I ended up going to Kaya. I sat all the way in the back, and I was prepared to walk out right when it finished. But then a man named Antonio Trong came and introduced himself to me, and he invited me to Bible study. And so I began to go. And honestly, I was just going to get my family off my back so they wouldn't worry about me. But I would be there every week. And now I thought that I was saved. I remember back to when I was about 5 or 6 years old, and I said a prayer, but I don't remember anything else. I don't remember why I prayed or what the significance of my faith even was. I just remember that I said a prayer, and from that moment on, I had written off my salvation completely. The only problem was that wasn't true, and I was blind to the truth. And I remember one night in particular, I was hanging out with my friends in the basement of one of my friends' houses, and somehow, just a group of guys, somehow the topic of the end of the world came up. And now growing up in church, the end time stuff was always the coolest things to learn about. And so that was really all I knew. I just started telling them everything that I knew was going to happen in the tribulation. I told them about the Antichrist. I told them how it was going to be hell on earth. But then I told them that I didn't have to worry about any of that because I was saved and I was going to be raptured out before that ever happened. And I remember like it was yesterday, one of my friends looked at me and he asked me, he said, "How do you get saved?" And I couldn't tell him. And so at that point, I started looking for what truly is the gospel. What does that mean for me? What is the truth? And what I found was that I myself did not fully understand the gospel. I didn't understand the exceeding sinfulness of my own personal sin, and then come to the place where I trusted in Christ as my sin bearer. And so on August 24th of 2021, while I was working at a golf course, I called out to the Lord for salvation. I was mowing lawns. And so now I'm going to kind of transition into what the call looked like. And so as my next step, I knew that I needed to be discipled after I got saved. And so I began discipleship, and I was learning so much. Everything was brand new to me. I did not know anything. And I got to see just exponential spiritual growth in my life during discipleship like I had never seen before in any area of my life. And as I was coming to the end of discipleship, the Lord put it on my heart to start to involve myself in missions. I had no idea to what capacity that would be, and I didn't have any idea of what mission field God wanted me to be involved in. but I did know I needed to be involved. I am commanded by the Lord himself to be involved in missions. And so that's what I started to look into. And then an opportunity opened up to go to Kenya for about 2 weeks with Pastor James Fife, David Gelvin, and my dad. And we went to Kenya for about 2.5 weeks, and it was life-changing for me. Again, this was my first mission trip ever. I had no idea what to expect, but I learned so much on that trip, and I got to use a ton of what I learned when I came back here for ministry. If you want to go to the next slide. This was just a couple pictures from our first trip. This was us on safari on the left, and this was David trying to crush me on the helicopter pad of the University of Nairobi. But at the time of this trip, there was no church. It was just a Saturday night Bible study, and the main focus of this trip was to find key men to disciple. And we met 2 men. Their names were Ken and Sebastian, and by the end of the trip, they both wanted to be discipled. So if you can go to the next slide. This is just what it looked like that trip. There was no Sunday service. We didn't have a building we were meeting in. We were just meeting in the apartment that we were staying in. And so this is that Bible study. It started out as a ladies' Bible study, and then it became a women's and men's Bible study, and then shortly after this trip, it became a Sunday morning church. But Pastor Fife, at the end of this trip, he took me on as an apprentice. And I got to spend the next year with Pastor Fife discipling Ken over Zoom. And so I knew that I wanted to go back and visit, especially since I was invested in that field. Like, we have a disciple there. And so I need to go see him. And so I prayed, and God provided a way for me to go to Kenya and spend a month there with the Fifes. And this time, I got to really invest in this field. I spent about 3 of the 4 weeks leading the youth there, which was very new to me. I had never taught the youth before, but I was willing to do whatever was needed. On the last day that we were there in Kenya, we had everybody in the main service. So all of the youth were in there with us, and we were sharing our prayer requests, and one of the youth boys gave his request. And his prayer request was that I would come back to Kenya and be their youth leader. And as soon as he said that, I knew I was in trouble. Because I know the power of a child's prayer. And when we came back, I was pretty jet lagged. And so I would wake up super early in the morning, and since I was up so early, I started taking walks in the park that was across the street from our house, or our neighborhood. And one morning when I was in the park, it was like 5 in the morning. And I brought my Bible because I wanted to spend some time with the Lord on these walks. And the Lord brought me to the proverb of the day, and it was Proverbs 25, and he brought me to verses 6 and 7, and it says this. It says, "Put not forth thyself in the presence of the king, and stand not in the place of great men. For better it is that it be said unto thee, Come up hither, than that thou shouldest be put lower in the presence of the prince whom thine eyes have seen." And basically what this verse is saying is that you don't want to exalt yourself or put yourself in the presence of the king or stand in the place of great men, because it's better to have someone else call you to more. Because if someone else calls you to more, then you don't have to worry about losing that. But if you exalt yourself, well, then you may need to be humbled. And we see this exact same concept in a parable in Luke 14, verses 7 through 11, where Jesus basically says that if you're invited to a wedding, you should put yourself in the lowest position at the wedding and allow somebody else to call you to a higher position, rather than putting yourself in the highest position and having to be humbled. And I say all of this to say that God was teaching me one principle, and that was humble yourself and wait for the call. And I had no idea why he was teaching me this. I mean, it didn't make a lot of sense at the time, and I even had trouble making application to it. Like, I could see a few ways that I needed to be humbled, but what call was I waiting for? I had no idea. A few more months went by, and we had our Kaya Fall Retreat. And at retreat, Pastor Brandon was preaching about slaying giants in the morning, and then Pastor Dan Renault was preaching in the evenings. And I believe it was the last night of retreat, but I was sitting next to Brandon, and I got a chance to pray with him. I told him that I was thinking about Kenya. You know, I knew I'm not the key man. I know we're trusting for a key man. That's not me, but maybe I could go as a support, However, Brandon did not seem to be super on board with that. He seemed to think that I needed more time to grow before that. And I want to be clear, Brandon was absolutely right, okay? And so from that point on, I kind of just let it go. If my pastor is not seeing it, then I'm not seeing it either. And I can trust the Lord with that, no problem. So I continued to just be faithful to what God had set before me right now. A few more months went by, and now it was May. And I just graduated from college at UMKC, and just a few days later, Miles Cheadle announced that he was called to be the pastor of Living Faith Nairobi, and his family was going to be moving to Kenya. I was so excited because we had been praying for a key man for so long, years, and man, Miles is perfect for the job. But then, about a week or two later, Miles approached me after Tuesday night prayer, and he asked me if I would pray and consider going with them and spending a year in Kenya. And this was a huge step of faith for me. I mean, now we're not just talking about a couple weeks or a month like before. Now we're talking about spending an entire year of my life on the other side of the world. And so because of that, this is a big decision. I wanted to take some time to pray through this, to make sure that I'm making a good decision. And so the next day I went for a walk in the same park that I mentioned before. And I was just asking the Lord, should I do this? Should I go to Kenya for a year? And look, I'm not the brightest, okay? I could easily ruin my life if I get this wrong. And so I don't want to twist scripture to make it say what I want it to say, or to make it say that, yeah, you should go. And so what I need is for the Lord to help me. What I need is for him to make it so clear to me that I could not mistake this for anything else. And as I continued on my walk and talking to the Lord, he brought something to my remembrance. And it was the same thing that he had taught me in the same park all that time ago when I first got back from Kenya. And it was the principle that he taught me out of Proverbs 25. Humble yourself and wait for the call. You see, I could have exalted myself when I talked with Brandon. You know, when he wasn't really seeing it, I could have said, no, God wants me to go now. I need to go now. But instead, I decided to humble myself. And the next step was to wait for the call. It was to wait for someone else to call me to more. And God was showing me in this moment that the call was when Miles literally asked me to go. I mean, it was pretty clear that God was calling me to Nairobi, even if it was just for a year. But remember, Brandon was not on board with this, and he is my pastor. And so we need to get this figured out. And I wanted to talk with him before I made a decision like this. And so I texted Brandon, and I said, hey, Miles asked me to pray and consider spending a year with him in Kenya. We should probably meet up and talk about this sometime soon. And when Brandon replied, he said this. He said, yeah, let's talk about that because it may have been my idea. Man, you have no idea how much peace that gave me to know that not only am I hearing from the Lord, but man, my pastor, who was not all for this before, he's all for it. And then Miles and Brandon both told me that they had taken this and they had put it before all of the pastors before they even approached me about it, and they were all for it. And that only increased my confidence that the Lord was in this. You see, now I had confirmation from the Word of God, the Spirit of God, my local church, and even in the circumstances of my life. So now I want to kind of transition and talk a little bit about the ministry in Kenya. So, and what my heart is and what my plan is for my time there. So when I went to Kenya for the first time, for 2 weeks, I met two men. I met a man named Ken when we were evangelizing at the mall, and I met a kid named Joshua who was about 16 or 17 years old when we went to play soccer. If you want to go to the next, oh, perfect. So this is Ken on the left, and then this is Joshua on the far right, and that's his brother Joel. And so these are the guys that I met on the first trip. And I'll just explain. This is what happened. Ken started bringing his mom, his younger brother Nicholas, his younger brother JP, and then Joshua started bringing his brother Joel, his sister Blessing, his friend Dixon, their other friend Joshua, and their other friend Moses. And if you want to go to the next slide, This is Dixon, Moses, and Joshua, and this is JP, Ken's youngest brother. And so I don't have a picture of Nicholas, but I wish I did. And so these kids, right, are now the youth of Living Faith Nairobi. And all I did was introduce myself to 2 men. And God used them to build a youth group. And so now my heart is for those kids. There is a need for a youth leader, and so that is my main focus of ministry when I go. I've never done youth ministry before, and I wasn't even particularly interested in youth ministry, but it is needful for this mission, and so that's what I'm going to do. And to prepare for this, I'm taking a youth ministry class in LFBI, and I'm spending every available Sunday in the youth ministries that we have here. I'm going into the middle school and I'm going into the high school because in Kenya, it's everybody is youth. And so I also plan to start a men's Bible study on the University of Nairobi's campus. And I'd like to start a corporate evangelism ministry for the church and to disciple a few guys while I'm there. Now that sounds like a lot for me. And so I'm really trusting the Lord to give me so much grace with all of this. And if you want to go to the next slide. Over here, this is Brian. You saw Ken. And then this is Sebastian. And these are the guys who are about my age or maybe even a little bit older. And so they're the ones that I'll be able to take in Bible study with me, to plant a Bible study. And my goal is to train up each of them so that they can each start their own Bible study around the city. And since I've committed to only being in Nairobi for a year, Miles has told me that in every ministry that I'm involved in, I need to bring someone alongside me and start training them up to take over immediately when we get there. Right now, we currently have about 9 members of the church who have completed D1 and are moving forward in faith and owning ministry for themselves. And there's a few more who are currently in discipleship. And then with that, I would ask you guys to pray for a few things. So if you want to go to the next slide. So prayer requests. Man, look at the Cheetles. They're so cute. But the first thing is we want to pray for support for the Cheetles. I mean, we are so grateful for the Cheetle family, for Miles answering God's call to be a pastor of the church, but they need support. And so please, please pray that they would get the funding that they need and that while they're on deputation, they would be able to create long-lasting relationships with some of these churches to partner with them for the work. And if God is putting it on your heart, maybe to give to the Cheetles, then there's an option in your MyMBT giving section where you can designate some of your giving to the Cheetles. The next thing would be jobs. We have multiple members of Living Faith Nairobi who are in need of jobs, and I am one of them. And I need a job that I could do remotely that will support me, or I need funding some other way. I also applied for a scholarship through the Decatur, Alabama church. And so I would need one of those two things, either a scholarship or a job. And so if you guys would pray for that, that would be huge. And then finally for our preparation, pray that God would bless our preparation, that he would use our time here in the States to continue to equip us for the work that he has called us to in Kenya. And then also for this one last thing is the visas. So Miles and Lisa have, I believe, found a way that they could get their visas. And so just pray that that would all go over very smoothly and that there would be no hiccups with that. But thank you guys so much for having me today. It is a huge privilege to get to talk to you guys. And I believe I'm handing it to Larry. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, let's take the last 5 minutes or so that we have and pray for these ministries. Pray for the Cheetles especially. It breaks my heart that Midtown trains up men that are called of God, and then they have to spend a year going church to church to church to church, begging for money, getting $50 a month here, $100 a month there from all these little churches all over the world. Midtown should support its missionaries. Pray about what we can do to help. This is our own flesh and blood from our ministry. Pray what you can do to help support these ministries. Like David said, $150 a month will put a missionary in a village in India that can change that whole region. The Cheadles are taking over what only God could do in starting a church. We all prayed that Jeanette not have to go back to Kenya when she was leaving. Now we're praying, rejoicing that God sent her back. But we need to support our missions in prayer. Think about who you should pray for every week. In our giving, because we are so blessed. And also, who will you actually bond with? What mission will you own and have an impact in the world? When you get to the judgment seat of Christ, can you say, like Cheney, I donated a year of my life to build this church for you in Kenya? So let's pray.